All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, Trish, you ready?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have as my guest today, Trish Michael. Trish, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Trish is an author, artist, photographer, and 2-time cancer survivor living in Maui, Hawaii, and working to make the world a better place with all that she does. Throughout her life, Trish has faced constant adversity: a single mom at 18, abusive marriage for 20 years, and cancer twice. Through it all, she's worked to see the bright side and be the bright side when it couldn't be seen. This shows in her uncanny ability to connect with people and show them their best self through her photography, as well as through her art and writing, which she uses to uplift and bring light. Her books, which have all been written for her own children at difficult stages in their lives, are her way of reminding them and the world that anything is possible. Pretty awesome and empowering. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get going here. How the heck did all this happen for you?
I'm not really sure, but I do know that the last 6 years of my life have been a roller coaster and have kind of put me in a unique position of really having to force myself to look at the good in anything, which it's been pretty hard, but it's also been this incredibly rewarding and valuable experience. And now that I'm coming out sort of, we're still kind of in it, but I'm feeling the light at the end of the tunnel. And so it feels an appropriate time for me to be sharing some of the wisdom and some of the things that I learned through that, so that other people who are maybe a couple years behind in this struggle have a light, because it can sometimes be hard to find.
Well, I mean, you referenced the last 6 years, but I mean, in your bio, being a single mom at 18, being in an abusive marriage for 20 years, obviously that went on much, much earlier. And I'm sure has had and been very impactful in your life as well.
Well, I feel like the first half of my life, so I actually left my ex-husband when I was 40. And I feel like the first half of my life was like what not to do. And then it all kind of came to this crux where I had no choice but to choose something different and a different path for myself and my kids. And I really genuinely feel like I am undoing generations of patterns in my family with what I'm saying no to now and what I'm saying yes to now. And I feel like it's been a lot, but I needed the training for the first 40 years to really be able to turn it around in the second half, which is turning out to be hard, but so much more filled with light and enjoyment. So
I want to kind of shift from the general and get more specific, because I think the gold is in the specificity here. And I want to give you kind of the option or the opportunity to kind of choose what you want to share. But I would like you to, if you could be more specific about what kind of decisions you made, how you made those shifts.
So as you mentioned, I was in a 20-year abusive relationship. And the irony of that is I didn't even realize that I was in an abusive relationship. And the reason why I left him was because my oldest daughter, who was not his biologically, but he had raised her since she was about 2.5, she came to me one day and told me that he had been abusing her. And so I had to confront him, and he admitted what he was doing. And that was the moment that my entire
Mm.
life changed. That's when we ended up going to an organization called Women Helping Women here, which is like an amazing organization. They helped us write up a restraining order against him. And it was at that point in time that I was looking on their wall, and there was this little pie chart. And I was looking at it and I was like, oh my God, yeah, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And it was the pie chart of abuse. So as I'm sitting trying to protect my child, I'm realizing this is why you're broken. This has not been good. And now it's time to protect your kids and yourself.
So the abuse was with your daughter.
So he sexually abused her for quite some time. When she came to me, it sounded like it had only been like a 4-month thing. But as we went through sort of more of the legal situation, more and more came out. So it had been going on for years.
Oh my
And
God.
I had no idea. So I was so broken from that relationship that I had resigned myself to stay. And so that situation, and my daughter being brave enough to come and tell me what was going on, is really what kind of freed us all. So that was the catalyst that started me on this journey of,
Mhm.
I need to be a better model of self-love to my kids, because I've got to undo what's been going on for their entire lives up until that point. So it was sort of like turning an ocean liner on a dime. Like I had to just change everything. And that meant that we're still dealing with this tipping of the boat still, but
Mhm.
things are so much better now. And a lot of important lessons were learned. And I know a lot of women are in a similar position, which is why what I'm doing now is writing children's books, because these books are being read by women who are in similar positions as I was to their children. And it's hitting them, because it's not like a self-help book or an obvious I'm abused, I need help book. This is a positive message for your kid book, and
Mhm.
it gets in. And so it's actually been, I always wondered why whenever I was broken, I would think in limerick. It made no sense to me, and I thought I was maybe cracking a little, but that's every time. All of these books are written in limerick, and it makes them really easy to take in the information. There's no resistance to it. So
Okay, let me um, ask you a question here. So you mentioned the pie chart of abuse. I'd never heard of that. What is that basically?
it kind of breaks out the different kinds of abuse there is. There's financial abuse, there's mental abuse, emotional abuse, and all of the pie pieces were me except for the physical abuse. And
Mm.
I think that happens a lot, where you're not being hit, and so you think that this
Right.
can't be abuse.
Right.
And I would say to my friends, like, I feel like an abused spouse. This is so bizarre. And it's ironic. My 2 younger kids, he still has access to them, which is a part of the ongoing saga. But my son has sort of taken on the role that I had. And so my ex is now quite abusive towards him.
Oh man.
And he says the same thing that I would say, which is, I wish he would just haul off and hit me, because then it would make sense why I feel so horrible.
Oh my God.
So it's a really interesting thing, abuse, because it comes in many forms. And um, another trend that I've learned through this process of finding healing is that most of the people who are in a position of being abused long term, they're not weak people. They're very strong people. You can't survive that unless you're very strong. But when you're a strong person, you don't want to be a victim. So it's
Mm-hmm.
this push and pull of, I feel like I'm being victimized, but I'm not a victim. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to like come to terms with that.
Mm.
Um, so that's another reason why I kind of feel like everything that I'm doing right now is in limerick, because they're very complex issues that we kind of butt up against. And so when you are not fighting the information, it kind of can settle differently.
Trish, I really appreciate you sharing what you're sharing, and also naming that position of, first of all, not recognizing what abuse is, because you're right on the money. If you're not being hit over the head or physically abused, how can that be abuse? How can anything else be abuse? And also, what you're saying, to endure that type of abuse, any abuse really, for that length of time, any length of time, requires not a weak person, but a very strong person. So, okay, how did you get to this point where you were being creative? I mean, to be in a place where you're being abused, I would think that it's really hard to start being creative. And here you are, you're an artist. Talk to us about how things unfolded for you.
Well, I've always kind of turned to an artistic outlet to process or to feel better. And then I made it my business and kind of wrecked it for myself. When you're a professional at photography, it kind of takes the hobby out of it. And so that was actually a part of the problem for me, because I no longer really had that outlet.
Mm-hmm.
So once I left him, it was definitely a couple of years before I was able to be back in a space of allowing myself to feel better. But the thing is with me, is the more broken I am, the more open I am. So as you can imagine, after 20 years of abuse, and didn't walk into an abusive marriage having had a great childhood, like I was set up for this. So that sort of prolonged, well, really what happened was, so as I had mentioned, so I left my ex-husband, and that kind of threw all of us for a loop. 3 months later, I got my first cancer diagnosis. And as a self-employed person, that is not easy. So dealt with that for a year. Surgeries, was also at the time selling my house. I mean, it was just a lot. And then once it seemed as though things were going to settle down, I got my second cancer diagnosis. And so started the cycle.
You mean like a different type of cancer, or?
It's the same cancer, but it had come back.
Okay.
And so dealt with that for another year and a half. And again, as I was getting things back to like, all right, I'm going to get my business back going, I'm going to get my life back going, COVID hit. And I lost my business overnight. And so I spent a lot of time out on my driveway just crying. And then my youngest daughter came out, and she would hug me, and then she would start drawing with chalk. And so I started playing with chalk with her, and it kind of awakened that, oh yeah, there's this process you can do of creating that helps you to release some of this stuff. And it's something you can do with your daughter, who, my kids have been struggling through this as much as I have. So it was sort of a way to connect with her with something that she enjoyed. And it was a way to reconnect with myself with something that I enjoyed. And then it ended up being a thing for the people on social media, because they were like, what are you doing today? So that kind of catapulted me back into a place of being creative. It was a very, like, you're on your hands and knees, basically rubbing your fingerprints off on the pavement. So it was a very physical, whole body experience. And I really think that opened me up to writing more books, and just being open to allowing myself to do things that make me feel better.
It's one thing to talk about this stuff, but as you're talking about it, I'm thinking to myself, Jesus, I mean, each thing, going through your childhood, right? Getting into this marriage, which in and of itself is so crazy, in the sense it's so seriously, severely traumatic and impactful. And then, cancer, of course, but I mean, it just speaks to your amazingness. Seriously, Trish, that you're here and you're taking care of your kids and you're doing it. And I just applaud you for it. Jesus.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting story. And to add to that, I have this very mentally ill ex-husband combined with a judicial system that completely failed my family. So every day it's there's always something, and my kids are still being traumatized because they still have to go and see him. So it's like I'm
I mean,
in
I
it.
just have to ask you, how does he have access to them still if he's been abusive?
So the judge that we had has since been removed. He was about a year after I went through that whole process with him. So an advocate contacted me and shared with me that that particular judge, they were trying to remove him, and they had countless stories and they wanted to add mine. And they were successful in removing him. And I will tell you, that was one of the best days of my life, hearing that he was removed. But to give you an indication of how broken our system is, he is now a guardian ad litem, which I'm not sure if it's the same term on the mainland, but that's a person who is responsible for determining the well-being of children.
Gosh.
So this is the system that I walked into, and it did not serve me or my children well at all. And it's taken, that was 2018, and it's taken until this year for me to feel solid enough to be like, okay, I'm going back in and I'm fighting and I'm making sure that I get my kids.
Let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Trish Michael. Her website is trishmichael.com. How did these books come about?
So the first one was written for my oldest daughter, the one who was abused. But that was about 10 years ago. I wrote it when she was 16. She was a difficult teenager, and perhaps what had been going on in the household added to that, unbeknownst to me. But it was a book to try and help her to make a connection between her decisions in life and how her life was turning out. And I was very broken. She was on the mainland in, I think, a mental hospital, series of steps that had led to that. And so I was just so exhausted, so broken, and this writing just plunked into my head. And I sent it to her and then held on to it for a while. And I think it was 2 years ago, I revisited this writing and looked at it again and realized that I hadn't been able to get it illustrated and published because it wasn't finished. And it wasn't finished because I was trying to tell someone else to be happy at a point in time when I had not put myself in that own position. So that book was finished, and then I self-published it. And that's been going actually quite well for a self-published book.
If I may. So this is called Find Your Happy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you just to be clear for me, so you wrote it to, it almost seems like because you're an artist, I mean, you just have to get stuff out. This is the way you do it, right? You're either on your hands and your knees and you're getting chalking, or you're writing these books. And you wanted to write this down to reconnect with your daughter.
And to really try to help her. And at times, all I have is my words. You know, I don't have the means to send someone to a program in a third world country where they can do service and learn. Like, there are so many things that people have been able to do for their kids that have kind of helped them to see, oh, maybe if I choose something different will happen. All I have is me and my words. And so, and the other thing with me with the writing is I don't know if it's necessarily me. I feel like at the times that these come in, I'm just so broken that I have no resistance to whatever it is that's ready to be said. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's how the writing really feels for me, is like it's sitting there in the ether, and when I'm finally open enough, it'll come in.
So who would benefit from reading this book, do you think?
So it is unanimous from everyone who I talked to that has read the book. It's written as a children's book, it's illustrated as a children's book, but literally everyone gets something out of it. Like you can open it and just read a page. It's just like basic stuff that we all kind of innately know. And children,
Mhm.
they just know this. They don't necessarily need this book. It's fun and they like it, but it's really the moms that are reading it and the
Mm.
parents that are reading it where they're like, oh. And I think about that because I would read the book, The Giving Tree, to my kids all the time. And I would cry every time. And as soon as I left my ex-husband, I'm like, this is the worst book on the face of the planet. Why would I read this story to my children? It's the worst message. You don't give everything you have to someone who doesn't appreciate it. Like that's not a healthy way to live.
Mhm.
So my goal with my books is to like replace that book so that we have good stories and messages that we're repeating to ourselves and to our kids.
And the second book is called Light.
Mhm.
Um, I'm just looking at your website here. It says your mind is full of thoughts. Some are like balloons, others like cinder blocks.
So it's this concept of that one was written for my son. My son is being used as a pawn right now by my ex, and so I'm trying. That one came in kind of as a way to help him to find his own way when living in an abusive, toxic household. Like it's not about right and wrong anymore. It's about what does this feel like to me? Does this feel like
Mhm.
something that's going to weigh me down, or does this feel like something that can lift me up and bring me to a better place? And so it addresses how he can find peace with his own decisions whilst he's there, but it also addresses the decision that I had to make with him, which he it's so everything in my life is so complex to try and distill it down. Basically, my ex is still able to get to me by hurting my kids,
Mm.
and his what he's turned to now is trying to turn my son against me. And so this interesting thing started happening where my son was being really abusive towards me in my home. And I don't accept that anymore. I can't. If you've had cancer twice from being toxic, you're like, no, I'm not doing that anymore. So the kind of the irony of the book was showing him that the reason why I had to ask him to leave was to help him to understand that he'll likely have to do that himself. You need to like model to your children, I'm not willing to take abuse from anyone,
Mhm.
so that they can walk. And he's going to have to one day choose between having his father in his life or not. And that's going to be a really brutal decision for him. And so I had to make sure that I was showing him, I love you, but this behavior is not acceptable and it should never be acceptable to you either. And it was kind of the book kind of addresses all of those things in one, but packages it as this simple concept that everyone's like, oh, that totally makes sense.
What we've talked touched on kind of a number of things here, but in your words, from your perspective, what do you think within yourself has helped you kind of put one foot in front of the other to move through all of this?
um, I mean, self love. I know it's like a buzzword now, but it is absolutely the most important thing that anyone can do is to really value themselves. And even when you don't value yourself, you still say it. It's that whole fake it till you make it. We have this thing in my family, it's called five nice things. If you say one unkind thing to yourself, you have to counter it with five nice things. And it kind of touches on the same concept of a cinder block and a balloon. Like you got to do more good to counter even a small amount of bad or a lack of kindness. So those are the types of things that I have put in place in my life. I wrote a 2-page pep talk to myself every morning for 3 years. You can do this. You're awesome. You have great qualities. Here are the things that I love about you. So I started every day writing those things, every day meditating. And I say no to a lot of things now, specifically people that they don't feel right in my space, which is something that I never did before. So the journey is obviously very different for other people, but really just making sure you start your day telling yourself you're awesome. You got to do that, because then you walk through your day and you're less likely to fall victim to the things that you used to fall victim to.
Did you ever seek out any kind of therapy? Was that ever something you did?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been highly therapized my whole life, almost to a point where now here, any therapist that I get, it's almost like split time. Like they talk to me as much as I talk to them. So I've kind of stopped doing that because I don't have the energy for that. My focus has really heavily been on making sure my kids get therapy. And I'm not sure if it's the same situation on the mainland, but there is a crisis with mental health care and access to it. And so my focus has been big on getting my kids sorted with that. And we're, like I had mentioned before, we're kind of like close to that light at the end of the tunnel. And I think at that point, I'll be at a place where I can focus a little bit more on me and unpackaging the past 45 years.
So once again, I'm speaking with Trish Michael. Her website is trishmichael.com. So you're also a photographer.
Yeah, I am. I've been doing that as kind of like my career for the past 15 years. I'm trying to move away from that because I lost that business 3 times in the past 5 years. And I don't know that I got it in me to build it up again. So, yeah.
These photos on your website are really freaking good.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm really good at what I do. I'm admittedly very good at it, and I enjoy it. But I also, there's something to realizing, like every time I pick up my camera, it's a reminder of the fact that I had to 4 months post mastectomy shoot a wedding. I was splitting my seams, bleeding everywhere, and no one knew. There's been so much that I've had to push myself through that every time I hold my camera, I'm just kind of like, I don't really know if I need to do something different, maybe just for a little while so that I can like unpackage, clear it out, and then enjoy it again.
Trish, what do you want to, I mean, I kind of, as we close out here, what message do you want to leave our listeners with? I mean, because you radiate a strength, you radiate an empowerment, you know, with all the shit that you've talked about and experienced. I can still feel that you have a lot of strength, and I see that. But what is your message, in a sense, that you want to leave these listeners with?
Well, I think that I oftentimes in my struggle would look to other people and be like, it looks like they just really have it together and they never really struggle, and they've got hard things too. And you can sometimes give yourself a hard time. And I just want everyone to know that most people tell me that I project strength and confidence. But I've got some baggage that you don't want to look at. So everyone struggles, and you just have to outlast the shit. Like we're all going through it. And my experience has been that the awesome shit, the really good stuff, is right on the other side of the darkest times that I've ever had. And so just don't give up. You just have to outlast the shit. And it's so worth it when you do.
Look, what's the best way for people to reach out and contact you, Trish?
Through my website, for sure. I've got my contact information there. I'm also on social media at I am Trish Michael. Yeah, I really am available I just want to help people. So
Awesome. Well, look, you are incredible, really inspiring.
thank you.
And I'd love to have you back at a later date. Keep apprised of what you're doing, everything you're doing. And I just want to thank you for coming on here and sharing your story. It's not easy.
It isn't, but it's time. I'm ready to share it and start moving things along. And I would love to come back on your show and report all awesome things. That's what I'm aiming for.
All right, Trish, take care.
Awesome. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.